Hello everybody, this is Mrs. Snook with section 6.5, conditions for rhombus, rectangles, and squares. And what we're going to do in today's lesson is determine if a parallelogram is a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square. So if parallelogram is a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square. Last time in section 6.4, we knew that they were a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square, and there were certain properties that we could say was true about the parallelogram because it was a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square. Today we're going the other way. All we know is that it's a parallelogram. And we're going to look at some properties of it that would allow us to conclude that it's one of these, a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square. So first up, a parallelogram is a rhombus. So these are rhombuses if any of these conditions is met. First one is that the diagonals of the parallelogram are perpendicular. So in shorthand, I would say parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals implies a rhombus. And that's all I need. Next one is a diagonal of the parallelogram bisects a pair of opposite angles. So look at this picture. Up here at angle D, it's bisected. Down here at angle F, they're bisected. So parallelogram with diagonal bisecting opposite angles implies rhombus. And the last one is if you have consecutive sides congruent. So take a look at our markings right here. Those two sides are next to each other. They're consecutive. They do touch each other. And they're marked congruent. So if you have that, then you, my friends, have a rhombus. So parallelogram with consecutive sides congruent implies rhombus. All right, next is the rectangle. And there's only two conditions that we need. Either of those would work to make a rectangle. The first one is the diagonals are congruent. So if I look at my picture here, and if I said that WY was congruent to XZ, then I have a rectangle. So parallelogram with congruent diagonals implies rectangle. And the second one is one right angle. So looking at this parallelogram, JKML, if I just have one of those angles, doesn't have to be angle K or angle L or angle M, any one of those angles is a right angle, I have a rectangle. So parallelogram with one right angle implies rectangle. And the reason is pretty simple. Because a parallelogram has opposite angles congruent, then L has to be congruent to J. J is 90, so L has to be 90. Because a parallelogram has consecutive angles supplementary, next to J is angle K, and to be supplementary, that also has to be 90 degrees. 90 plus 90 is 180. And then for the last angle, angle M, take your pick. Opposite to angle K, supplementary to angle J or angle L, or four-sided, the interior angles have to add up to 360. You've got 390s, so that's 270. So 360 minus 270 gives you 90. So therefore, all you need is one right angle to declare a parallelogram to be a rectangle. And recall from last time, if it is both a rhombus and a rectangle, then you've got a square. So if I pick one condition from rhombus and one condition from rectangle, and my figure has both of those, I've got a square. So with that in mind, let's classify each of these parallelograms. So number one, I'm told that MO is congruent to PN. Those are diagonals. So I have a parallelogram with congruent diagonals. That implies, so just go back if you can't remember, just look at this little chart here. Diagonals are congruent, that's a rectangle. So this one is a rectangle. And the fact that we put in the justification counts for our explain. Number two, I have a parallelogram. This parallelogram has diagonals that are bisecting opposite angles. So you see the angle at T and the angles at V, those are bisected. So parallelogram with a diagonal that bisects opposite angles implies rhombus. So this one's a rhombus. Last one. I'm told that AC is congruent with BD. So I have parallelogram with congruent diagonals. That implies rectangle. I also have marked in my picture right there, I've got a right angle in between those diagonals. So, parallelogram with, let's see, did we say right angle or perpendicular? Perpendicular. With perpendicular diagonals implies rhombus. So this one is both a rectangle and a rhombus. So my answer for this one is square. All right, now we're going to do some more mathy algebraic stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm giving you a picture. I'm telling you what type of special parallelogram it has to be. And then you're going to solve for the value of x that forces it to be that type of parallelogram. So look at number 7. I'm telling you that's going to be a rhombus. And I've given you information about an angle. Now that angle has to be bisected by the diagonal. If this is a rhombus, then I have to have that angle bisected. So therefore, this little angle up here has to be congruent with this one. So I would say 6x plus 32 equals 17x minus 1. And then just solve the equation. So this was the geometry. Writing that equation, that's the geometry. Now we're doing algebra. I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides, so I get 11x. I'm then going to add 1 to both sides, and I get 33. And then when I solve this, divide both sides by 11, I get x equals 3. So if x equals 3, then, and only when x is 3, no other value will work, this figure is a rhombus. Number 8 is asking this to be a rectangle. Now we know in a parallelogram that your diagonals bisect each other. We also know that in a rectangle, the diagonals have to be congruent, which means I can mark it like this. So therefore, for me to guarantee that this is a rectangle, I have to set 6x minus 3 equal to 5x. And you can't see this, it got cut off a little bit, but it is telling us that ay is equal to xz. So we also are told that our diagonals are congruent. So now I'm just going to solve for x. I've written my equation, so I've done the geometry. Now all I'm going to do is algebra. I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides, and I get x. And I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get x equals 3. So this one is a rectangle only if x equals 3. And for fun, let's plug in x. So over here, 6x minus 13. So 6 times 3, sorry, not minus 13, minus 3 equals 18 minus 3 equals 15. So this piece right here is 15 units long. The other one, 5 times 3 equals 15. So that piece is also 15 units long. And if I wanted to, I could then say that AY, so over here also has to be 15, and in here has to be 15. So AY is 15 plus 15, which equals 30. XZ is supposed to equal AY, so it should also equal 30. All right, number 9, rhombus. This time we are told that angle PMN is 110 degrees. Now when I'm dealing with a rhombus, that means that the angle at M is bisected. So those two angles have to be congruent. So I can say 5x equals 110 degrees. That's the geometry. I've written my equation. Now just divide both sides by 5. And I think you get 22. Last one, we're going to make this a rectangle. We know that MB is congruent to RO. So MB and RO, the diagonals are congruent. We know that the diagonals have to bisect each other because it is a parallelogram. So I'm just going to say 7x minus 2 equals 5x plus 16. And to make things easier, you can just go ahead and mark those congruent. And then, of course, here and here are also congruent. That helps you remember what you need for a rectangle. All right, let us solve because we finished our geometry. I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. I get 2x. Add 2 to both sides. I get 18. X equals 9. So when x is 9, our figure here is a rectangle. All right, we got 2 more to do, I think. This time, number 11 is a rhombus. And then we have a triangle right here that I'm going to highlight. And we're given expressions for 2 of the angles in that triangle, and we're asked to solve for x. And the only thing we know is that it's a rhombus. But remember, a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals, oh, not arrow width, implies a rhombus. So therefore, to force this to be a rhombus, I have to make that perpendicular. So now, check it out. I've got, if you remember from chapter 4, the 3 angles in a triangle add up to 180. So 90 plus 5x plus 10 plus 6x plus 3 has to equal 180. Subtract 90 from both sides. And I did this for you to show you a shortcut. Because I know one of those angles is 90, then the other 2, I can just add them up and get 90. So if you want to take a shortcut, you can start with that equation right there. So let's combine our like terms. We have 11x plus 13 equals 90. 11x equals 77, x equals 7. Last one, a rectangle. So check this out. They've given us, again, we know two angles, and they're in the same triangle. But I only really need to know one of those angles, because I know that a parallelogram with one right angle implies a rectangle. I just need to set this angle here, set that equal to 90. So that other business, the 2x minus 1, that's a distraction, and you don't need it. So 4x equals 62, I think. And then x equals. So this is where you might want to grab your calculator and do 62 divided by 4. You're not going to get a whole number, and that's okay. X is 15.5. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a great day.